just briefly about the trip to Korea. There were 8 of us that went on the trip, 9 including the interpreter from the United States who is South Korean as well, and went and interpreted for us and led us about throughout the country along with several others that were there. We went because of an organization called GEM, Global Education Missions, and Pastor Nam is the visionary over this. GEM is the umbrella organization, and his goal and his dream that the Lord has put in his heart, his vision is to raise up young adults, middle school and high school, with excellence of education and having them led by the Spirit of God to eventually go into the workforces around the globe with the intention and purpose of leading people to Jesus Christ. It's a powerful and a huge dream and vision. He has several campuses. There were 2 that we visited in South Korea. There's one in Thailand, and they also have a preschool that basically the educational system in South Korea is failing pretty miserably. And both campuses that they have now started because the government handed it over to them for a very small fee, and then they've added on to the campus as they went. So imagine raising up young people of excellence that every day there's ministry going on by chapel services. Every morning they have a chapel service. They all know 4 languages. They learn English, Spanish, Japanese, and their native language, South Korean. They all have to do a sport. They all have to learn an instrument. And every student takes Taekwondo. It's part of the Korean culture that they're learning and carry with them. Many of them go into black belt with the Taekwondo. So with just that alone is amazing what they do. They also have multiple missions trips from their campuses into their local community. So they're teaching them to be missional in what they do. Every student has to come to the United States for a year, and they want them to learn a better conversational English. Again, the goal is we're going to eventually send these students out to be global leaders for Jesus Christ. Wherever they go, they will probably start a Korean organization, maybe a small church of some kind, and raise up believers around them for the glory of God. So it's just incredible. His goal is to reach 10 million people through the students that he raises up through his organization. So he's a great man of vision, and we just enjoyed his humility of spirit, gentleness of spirit, and yet just something about him exude great authority in the spirit realm as well. The South Koreans, as you know, Korea is divided into North and the South. The North Koreans are communist, and there's been a lot of animosity over the years, as we've all heard the news lately with the preparation of the missiles and so forth that they have. And there's a little sense of fear in South Korea right now because of that. But there's a deeper sense of unification between the North and the South that's built into everything that they do and everything that they believe, that one day God's going to unify the country. They've done 2 things. One, in what they call their General Congress. It would be like our Congress assembly when they come together. It's a massive building, dome-like building. When they built that building, they have the Congress for South Korea, massive room on one side, and in preparation for the unification of North and South Korea, on the opposite side of the building, they built a replica, the exact same thing they have for South Korea. They have one for the North Korean Congress, should that day ever come. So they literally spent millions of dollars in preparation for the unification of the country. One of the other things that we saw that they did, that they built this train station. In fact, George W. Bush was there to sign one of the ties when they finished the train station that goes through Seoul, aimed right towards North Korea, and stops as far as it can go north. And it stops. It's a massive, very state-of-the-art train station, buildings, 4 lanes of track, and it's just absolutely gorgeous there. But it's sitting there empty. and with the hopes and anticipation that when North Korea opens up, they'll extend the railway into North Korea. So we were just, the thought that hit me when I saw what was in their heart and saw what effort they went to unify the country, the thought was, God, as Christians, we're asking you to unify believers all around the globe. We're asking you to bring people to Christ, but what are we doing tangibly to show the faith that we believe you're going to do that? And ask yourself this question. Maybe there's an unsaved loved one or whatever it might be. What have you physically done? What have you put in place so that that one that you've been praying for a long time to come to the Lord, once that happens, there will already be things in place that can make the unification a real easy and sweet thing. And that's just sort of hit me really hard. And I realized that I have very little faith when it comes to that. But their faith is so large that they were willing to put millions of dollars on the line to prepare for one day the unification of North and South Korea. And people are praying for them all the time. South Korea just made an endeavor into North Korea where they actually built a little city just over the border into North Korea. North Koreans obviously allowed this to happen. And what happens is the North Koreans, some of the CEOs of corporations, have several businesses with light electronics like flashlights and light bulbs and a few things like that they make in this little village with the intention of raising up. The issue is when they go to North Korea, they can get real cheap labor under communism. So the benefit for the South Koreans is that labor is cheap. The benefit for the North Koreans is that the CEOs don't pay the employees, they pay the government. So last year, $20 million alone went to the North Korean government. Unfortunate, because they're probably using it for wrong things. But the issue with the South Koreans is they want to get on North Korean soil, and the CEOs are believers who are praying over the North Korean soil when they get there. And this little village is already prospering so much that they're hoping to put another one just a little further into North Korea. And it's been a great benefit to North Korea. But you just see how they just have a great big vision for bringing North and South together. As I mentioned earlier, when you look over into North Korea, it's barren because there's such poverty there and such oppression there that the people have stripped the mountains of all the lumber so that they can just heat themselves and keep themselves warm in the wintertime. And when you look at South Korea, it's just plush, and God's prospering it in an amazing way. So how many know it's good to be on God's side? Amen? Amen. We went to several locations there. One of the locations was kind of a museum sort of building along with a cemetery of all the missionaries that have gone to South Korea and invested their lives, many of them dying on the soil of South Korea. Long list of missionaries, the history of the missionaries. 1,500 missionaries went to South Korea before it was ever evangelized, giving their life for the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I think today, as they're looking down from heaven upon South Korea and they're seeing the prosperity of the church, they must be smiling that their blood was not sown in vain. So 1,500 missionaries poured into South Korea over the period of a long time. And now South Korea at this point has sent out 20,000 missionaries around the globe. How many know that's a pretty good return on your missionaries? It's pretty awesome. We also went to a museum called the Korean War Museum. Koreans have a great warmth, especially the older Koreans, towards the Americans, because when the Korean War happened, Korea was supplied mainly by the Russians. Many of the tanks and guns and so forth that they used were all Russian-made. And when the North Koreans came down, supplied by the Russians, they basically just stripped South Korea until eventually they cornered them way down in the southeastern tip of South Korea. And the Americans came and fortified the troops there. General MacArthur said, if you can hold that line for 2 days, I'll bring some troops in. And so as they're holding this, General MacArthur came with the Navy, and he came, and there's a small area north of where the fighting was happening that the tide rises 50 feet. And so he literally had a half hour to bring these massive ships in and unload them on South Korean soil and get the ships back out of the bay before they would be destroyed by the rising of the tide and stuff there. And so they came in above where the war was, and what they were able to do, what General MacArthur was able to do, is shut off the supply from the north. And they held that line and then began to attack the North Koreans from behind and literally just squelched the war at that point. And because of that, South Korea is still there today. And so the South Koreans are especially appreciative of the United States. And to them, General MacArthur is a hero. They had, life-size figures of him in the museum and all. So our country, United States of America, around the globe in many nations, is thought highly of because of what we have done to help so many nations. And as long as we remain a nation under God, I believe the Lord will bless that. And our nation, as you know, is being taxed and really pressured with our Christian heritage. And one other just quick note before I turn it over to Bettina, our missionary for this morning, is the South Korea is, Ken, I don't know if you have ability to pull up very quickly here. I meant to ask you earlier, and I saw you were busy, so I didn't lay it on you. If you can't, that's fine. South Korea, a topographical map of South Korea. South Korea is very mountainous. And because of that, it's hard to get around wherever they go. But they've become masters at drilling tunnels through these mountains. So much so that many of the nations that need tunnels drilled, like when we head out towards Pittsburgh, the tunnels, we go to the mountains. Some of the nations that have tunnels needing to be drilled, they call upon the South Koreans because of their expertise in that manner. Just prior to the Korean War, someone defected from North Korea to South Korea. And when they did, they told the South Koreans that the North Koreans were digging tunnels underground into South Korea. So the South Koreans dug little holes all across as much as they could. I don't know what the distance was between the holes. And they started filling them with water. And if the water went down, they just presumed that there was a tunnel underneath. And so they have found at this point 3 very large tunnels. And by the way, when they tunneled, they weren't going through dirt. It's granite that they were digging through. So I imagine the slave labor. I can't imagine how many North Koreans died in building these tunnels. But when they found the tunnels, the South Koreans were able to build another tunnel that went down into the tunnel that the North Koreans were building. And it's now kind of a museum kind of thing where you can actually go down in and walk through the tunnel that the North Koreans built. And they've put up some cement barriers inside the wall. The first wall is solid cement. The second wall has a camera built on the far side of it aimed at the first wall in case the North Koreans would ever break through. They would have a warning. And then the third wall that they have has a 1-foot square that when we went down in, we could look through the square and see the other wall that was some distance down the tunnel. And they presumed that North Korea could put about 30,000 troops in an hour. 30,000 heavily armed troops through those tunnels in an hour. They're not really sure what North Korea had in mind with the tunnels, other than obviously you can bring a lot of people underground and really surprise it wherever they would come up. Or my thought was, potentially get into large land masses and set off some kind of bomb underneath ground and just literally collapse South Korea. But whatever the case, it was a rather interesting thing that we got to do. We met a pastor who is right on the border. Dorasan is the little town that you have to have special permission to live there because it's right on the North Korean border. The DMZ, it's called the Demilitarization Zone there. And he pastors all the soldiers. And he was the funnest guy to be around because when we went to the DMZ, all the soldiers were like buddies to him. And so he's calling them by name, putting his arm around them. And many of the soldiers that we met had some kind of interaction with the United States. They've either been to college here or have had missionaries, parents that have been around the world. And many of them spoke very, very good English. So all in all, it was just an incredible trip. We learned a lot about South Korea, and still asking the Lord what part He would have us to do and me to do concerning South Korea. But we enjoyed the trip. So I want to say thanks again to the Missions Committee for allowing us to be there, and for the church board for allowing me to be away, and for all of you taking care of things while I was away. I appreciate it. Did you ever find a map, Ken? He had it up there, didn't he? Yeah. Figures. I don't know if the map showed you how mountainous it was, but it's very, very mountainous. Seoul, South Korea is where we flew into. It's kind of the northwestern part of Seoul itself. But you saw the map, so you don't need to pull it up for me. I've seen it as well. Well, Bettina Weaver...